All right, today we're diving into something that's honestly a huge puzzle in public finance. It's this idea of an accounting blind spot. We're going to look at how the very rules meant to keep budgets in check might actually be, kind of ironically, pushing us toward making really bad, really expensive infrastructure decisions.
So why do governments keep picking these infrastructure deals that, on the surface, just seem to cost way more in the long run? You've probably wondered about this yourself, right? You see the headlines all the time. A brand new hospital or a highway gets built, it's a big public-private partnership, and then, a few years down the line, all you hear about are the crazy costs and these super rigid contracts. What is going on here? Why does this pattern repeat itself?
And look, this isn't just a one-off mistake here and there. It's a pattern. Even when there's solid evidence showing these deals have higher costs and more risk over the long haul, they stay incredibly popular with governments, not just here, but all over the world. It's a real head-scratcher. Now, the answer probably isn't what you're thinking. It's really easy to jump to some obvious conclusions. But the usual explanations? They don't really get to the core of the problem. The real driver is something much quieter, much more subtle.
So, what are the usual suspects? Corruption? Sure, that happens. Incompetence? Okay, maybe sometimes. What about just short-term political games or some kind of baked-in ideology? And yeah, all those things can definitely be part of the story. But the source we're looking at today argues the real root cause is something much more systemic, and it's something that's basically hidden in plain sight.
The thing that's really driving this is something we almost never think about. We just treat it as this neutral, technical thing humming away in the background. Honestly, it's something most of us would think is so boring we wouldn't even think to question it.
It's accounting. Yep, accounting. I know it sounds kind of weird, right? But just stick with me here. The core argument is that the very rules we've set up to count public money are the things unintentionally steering us towards making these terrible deals.
And that brings us to this really powerful idea. Accounting isn't just a passive record keeper. It's not just about bean counting. It's what you could call an invisible governor. Think about it. By deciding what gets labeled a debt or what counts as an asset, it's actively shaping which choices look smart, which look responsible, and which look affordable. It's basically governing our decisions from the shadows.
Okay, so if accounting is this invisible force shaping our reality, then that leads to the really big question. What isn't it showing us? What's hiding in its blind spot?
Well, you have to remember what public accounting was designed for in the first place. These systems grew up to solve very specific, short-term problems. Their job was to enforce discipline from one year to the next in that annual budget cycle, and to contain public debt, keep it under control, and of course, to make sure everything was auditable so politicians could be held accountable. And don't get me wrong, those are all super important, good things.
But, and this is the key, that focus creates a fundamental blind spot. A system that's absolutely brilliant at managing short-term, year-to-year finances is, by its very design, pretty much blind to the long-term, multi-decade stuff. So its greatest strength becomes its greatest weakness.
And this is really where you see that blind spot in action. Look at what the accounting system sees, what it's really good at. Annual budgets, official debt numbers, those nice, neat contract payments. It sees that stuff crystal clear. But what does it miss? What's completely invisible to it? Well, the slow, quiet decay of a city's water system, the real long-term needs of a hospital, or, and this is a big one, that hidden fragility that just builds up silently year after year when you put off maintenance.
So let's break down what's missing. The first big idea is something called capital continuity. Okay, think about a city's water network. The real goal isn't just to own a bunch of pipes, right? The goal is to make sure clean water keeps flowing, not just today, but for decades to come. Accounting is great at recording the purchase of those pipes, but it has absolutely no way to measure the ongoing health of that entire system.
The second thing the books miss are what the source calls mission cycles. Here's an example. An MRI machine in a hospital has a real functional lifespan. It's based on the actual needs of modern healthcare. That's its mission. But accounting doesn't see that. It just appreciates the machine on some generic fixed schedule. The books have no idea when that machine is actually becoming obsolete for its mission. They only know when its value on the spreadsheet hits zero.
And then there's the third one, deferred fragility. And honestly, this might be the most dangerous of all. Let's say you put off essential maintenance on a bridge, year after year after year. What are you doing? You're building up risk. It's a ticking time bomb. But that risk, it's completely invisible on the balance sheet. On paper, that bridge looks totally fine, fiscally responsible, right up until the day it fails. The accounting system is great at recording the crisis, but it never saw the decades of neglect that led to it.
Okay, so let's put this together. We've got an accounting system with this massive blind spot for anything long-term. Now, with that in mind, we can start to see how certain kinds of deals, especially these public-private partnerships, are almost perfectly designed to exploit that weakness. And that's exactly why they look so good to public officials.
This table really lays it all out. Let's say you build a bridge the traditional way. You borrow money, and bam, you get this huge, very visible spike in the official public debt. It looks heavy on the books right now, but if you do it as a public-private partnership or a PPP, that debt often gets kept off the government's official balance sheet. Instead, the cost is smoothed out into these predictable, smaller annual payments. Suddenly, the project looks fiscally light. And if you're a finance minister who's being judged on this year's budget numbers, that looks like an absolute magic trick.
And this leads to a fantastic quote from the author of this piece, Roshan Gadamian. He says, "The reason these deals are so popular isn't that they perform better economically. It's that they perform better accountingly."
So what's the bottom line here? It's that our system is set up to reward the appearance of being fiscally responsible right now over the actual, substantive work of being a good steward for the long term and building things that will last.
All right, so that's the problem. It naturally leads to the next question. What on earth do we do about it? And the argument here is that just tweaking a few rules isn't going to cut it. The solution requires a fundamentally new way of seeing public finance.
The problem isn't technical, it's conceptual. Just changing a few accounting standards isn't the fix. It's like you can't measure something if you don't even have a word for it, right? The issue isn't that our measurements are a little off. It's that the entire framework we're using is missing these huge, fundamental concepts.
So the deeper challenge is to completely reframe the debate. This whole public versus private fight, it's kind of a distraction. The real issue is that our financial language itself is broken. We need to figure out how to make those invisible things, that capital continuity, those mission cycles, that deferred fragility, we need to make them just as visible and just as urgent on the balance sheet as this year's budget deficit.
And that really leaves us with a final, pretty critical question to think about. Our accounting systems, as they exist today, were built to look backwards, to account for the past and manage the present. But infrastructure, that's all about building for the future. So if the very books we're using to make these enormous decisions are blind to the long term, how can we ever hope to build a future that's actually resilient, sustainable, and in the truest sense of the word, affordable?